Well, welcome, Matthew. Hi, John. How are you?
Peachy dandy.
Peachy dandy. I like that.
I'm trying new phrases.
Oh.
I'm looking for a catchphrase. That's
I don't know
probably
if I
not
go
it.
with that one.
Yeah,
Let's
that's
keep
probably
workshopping
not the
that.
one.
Yeah. Matthew, do you have any great catchphrases you want to share with us before we introduce you?
Um, I mean, my usual go-to is what? Oh, wait, can I swear on this podcast?
You can. Yeah.
My usual one go-to is what the fuck is happening right now? Um, Usually just because I just feel so overwhelmed and clueless about everything and everything and everything. So
That seems like a good
Well,
question to ask, though. I mean, sometimes nobody's asking that question, and you really need to. And I wonder, like, do you have experiences with work and clients where that's an appropriate thing to just like, wait a minute, time out. What's
mhm,
going on right now? Does
and
that
let
ever
me
happen?
let me just interject
mhm.
so we can introduce Matthew. But I actually think that was exactly my question, John. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. Matt is an experienced design and research leader. He's worked on dozens of products in so many different industries: healthcare, financial services, education. He and I know each other through an extensive network of agency owners, and his work complements what we do a lot, doing user experience. And so hopefully we have the opportunity to work together in the future. But he also loves coffee, motorcycles, and long walks off short piers, which is my favorite thing. But I think ask that question again. I think that's a great question. And I think you should always want to know what's going on and stay curious and open as a researcher, right? It's like kind of what you're hired to do.
Yeah, I mean, I the way I interpret it, the job of research is to um, be as curious as possible, be as little judgmental as possible, and always tell the truth, not my truth as the researcher, but the truth of the people who have told me what their lived experiences are like, and to not hold back any of that from whoever the stakeholders are. If it's, hey, they think your product sucks, like that's what's going to happen, and it's going to be 10-minute clip of people crying because they can't use your product or whatever, whatever the thing is that's going to really communicate uh, the story behind what we found out. So,
Have you actually had the experience of 10 minutes of people crying about not using a product?
I mean, not 10 minutes, but yeah.
People have cried though?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Sure.
interesting.
We've had people cry too.
Yeah.
Okay, totally. I have to at least know like what are the products that you're researching that cause people to come to tears?
Well, I mean, the one that comes to mind the fastest is the study we did with people who suffer from migraines 24/7.
Okay. Yeah, that's
And the
tearful.
client was like, hey, we want to make an app that people can use on their phone to track their migraines. And my first thought was, you want to make people look at their phones while they have a migraine? What's wrong with you? I didn't say the what's wrong with you part when I asked the question, but yeah, I mean, that was definitely because of that quickly changed from looking at what a digital solution might be to a in-person service design project, because there was a lot of emotion around what interactions with doctors at doctor offices and being listened to, being just the physical space issues. So there's a lot of frustration around that.
Yeah, for sure. That's good insight. John, what was yours?
The one that pops to mind is we were researching a project for a staffing company, which actually is a really fascinating industry because you're helping people find meaningful work and certain role types. They were kind of the intake people that help people find the work. They were the only point of contact, and they were getting called by team members, employees with issues at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they were the only line of contact. And they took those calls because they felt in their heart that they needed to help these people and wanted to serve them, but they didn't want to take calls at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And they were in conflict with the desire to like do this very missional feeling component of their work, but also, not knowing how to sort of explain up the chain that this is not the way we should be doing things. You don't pay me enough to get calls at 2 in the morning by a temp worker. So yeah, that was a good one. Those are the things you get to help out with, though. That's the great part about it.
So you're helping fix those problems. So, okay, which leads me to my very first question, which is how you align your research projects and your questions with business objectives. And it actually triggers, if you're hired to do UX research for a digital product and you're telling them that the solution they need to build is an in-person service,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that often your app's going to fail, so walk away? Or did this organization have the capacity to say, let's build an in-person service? That sometimes seems almost impossible.
Yeah, I would say that what usually helps with finding that alignment is those first sessions with participants. It usually only takes just one. And a lot of times, even if I see problems with what the brief is essentially from the client of, hey, I'll obviously try and steer them in the right direction through conversations, but if I can't get there, oh, hey, now I've got the barking. If I can't get them there, then going through the first session with a participant often is enough to drive the conversation of, oh yeah, maybe we are on the wrong track and we need to realign to what we really need to focus on. In the migraine case, it was really easy to steer the team, even just through conversations, just walking through a scenario of a basic, I'm looking at my phone, my head hurts. Like, well, maybe we should. Maybe, and the answer wasn't necessarily, okay, let's focus on services. The answer was, let's take a step back or go higher level and just talk to people about their experiences. And from that, we will then understand what direction we need to go. So in that case, the end result was essentially prototyping changes in how they provided services at the doctor's office. But to get there, it was first project, and then second research project focused on that led us to the in-person experience, and then we researched that, and then we did the experiment. So in that case, I will say not the organization, but the team was very open to it. Same organization, different team, different project, very uninterested in what their customers had to say. And it cost them millions and millions of dollars to understand that. So
how often is that the case where, they're hiring a designer? Maybe this is like a 2-part question, because I think a lot of people think about designers as these very artistic people, which a lot of them are, just going in and, getting this wave of inspiration and then, like designing this amazing experience or, product or whatever. And really it's a lot about listening and research, being willing to kill your darlings and applying those things to build build something that actually solves the problem. So actually defining the problem is important. Mm-hmm. And some of what you're saying, you're talking about sort of reframing some of these business objectives and solving for those things. Like, how might we do this? Are you attached to the solution being a technology? Could it be a service? How often could you speak to that a little bit? Like what people think designers are versus what your actual job is. And then also, like, how often do people just want to keep their head buried in the sand and they're comfortable sort of pushing forward and they don't actually want to listen to the research.
I'm laughing. So yeah, I think the second part first, heads buried in the sand. I think truly it's pretty rare that someone is like, they really don't want to hear it, you know. There are times when you hit a level of intransigence in almost always a single individual, almost always in the highest level of an organization. Almost always someone who says things like, I had this idea at dinner last night. I think we should run with it. And they think that that's like a way to run a business. Sometimes there are good ideas, I'll admit, but
they skip to the solution all the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for me and all of us, like all humans, we all talk in terms of solutions, right? And the part of the researcher, when you're going out and talking to people, they're going to talk in solutions too. And our job is to sort of work back from that solution with them and looking across all the research to then talk about like, what is the core problem here? But as far as burying the head in the sand, like I said, it's pretty rare that it happens. I think the biggest thing that I've learned to have the conversations with, especially when I'm just getting to know an organization, is really understanding the extent to which they're being changed by what we find out through the research. And sometimes I will ask that directly, especially if the point of contact is like, well, I got the funding for this project, but the higher-ups aren't really sold on us asking customers questions. And so that obviously right there is a flag for like, okay, well, I'll take your money, but I'm not necessarily going to have an impact here, right? You're not necessarily going to have an impact, or the conversation is like, what small impact can we have? But if they're open to being changed by it, I mean, really, then it's just what level of question, where are they at as far as the life cycle of what they've been looking at. I've had a client come to me and say, hey, we'd love you to do some usability testing. We launch in 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. Correct response.
Yeah. Which means we're not willing to change anything because we're launching in 3 weeks. We're just going to keep forging ahead and maybe consider these things for our roadmap in V2.
Yeah, exactly.
People extend that rubber hits the road moment out so far, where they're not getting the real feedback that would actually impact the product or service early enough. And by then it's too late. And I think they're probably well-intentioned by asking those questions, but naive in the fact that it's just not, that's not how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for the most part, they're just repeating the patterns that they're used to. So if, in past organizations that they've worked with, that's when research was brought in, that's what you do. And that's okay. Like we can change that. And usually it's pretty easy to change it, where like in that case, this was an app that was for internal business processing. So the usability testing was with their employees, and their employees couldn't figure it out.
Oof.
And so it's like, well, you've got to stop because you're about to launch this thing and productivity will tank.
Yeah. Or they'll keep using the same workarounds they were using before, and you won't see any, like usually you build those internal apps to increase capacity or efficiency or something. Mm-hmm. And if people are just going to continue doing the way things they did before, it's just a waste of time and energy.
Yeah. And boy, did they have a lot of workarounds with the software they were using, like so many. And there were some things they were doing that was actually more efficient to do it the way that they had figured it out. And so why not map the new system to support that? And there were some things they were doing. It's like, oh, that's technically illegal, so let's not do that anymore. But yeah, it's like I think timing is the big thing. It's like, when are you bringing me in? I had a client several years ago who said, hey, people have meetings. Go find out about that. And it was like, okay. And then, we're doing the readout, and there's some designers in the room, and they're furiously taking notes and making sketches. And our point of contact was like, let's pause everything. What are you two doing? And I was like, oh, we're just coming up with ideas of how we should change the design. And she said, no, that's not where we're at now. This research kicks off more research, no design decisions. And those are often the most fun, because it's really a let's see what's out there kind of project. But then there's we launch in 3 weeks, and tell us what's wrong with it. And then it's like, everything.
So what's
So.
the ideal scenario, and when do you get brought into a project? How much timeline should you have when you get involved? Because there has to be some level of near completeness, or at least, minimally usable product before you can actually test it, right? No?
No.
Sketches, ideas, visuals? Okay.
If that. Like,
yeah. Concepts.
We've done research where it's just boxes with words, and it's tell us what's most, why am I trying to say prioritous? No, that's not a word. Which of these has the highest priority for you, right? And it's essentially doing a card sort of concepts that will then eventually manifest into, boxes that have features on an app. But really just understanding, like, here's all the things that the company thinks is important. What do you think? And then they rearrange everything, and it's like, well, we care about these 3 things. And then sitting at the bottom of the list is the thing that the product manager cared the most about. And then, which is fine, but, then you have to have that conversation of like, do you do what the product manager wants to do, or do you do what your customers want to do? And that's where sometimes coming in as an external person, you can say, you should probably do what your customers want, because they're the ones who give you money that allow you to have a job. But, if that doesn't align with the long-term vision of the company, there's all these, this is why, designers, researchers, they're always saying it depends, right?
Yeah.
There's so many different and competing bits of criteria that go into these choices that there's no wrong time to bring in a researcher. It's just the impact they can have is going to depend on when you bring them in, and what questions you really want answered.
Willingness to change.
And the willingness to change based on what's found out. Yeah.
Can I go ahead, John?
Well, I'm super curious, because you walk into, depending on when you come into the project, you've always got stakeholders, and sometimes some like hidden stakeholders, or one level removed kind of stakeholders. Usually they come with their own pet projects or agenda. Do you have any tricks or tactics that work to sort of open their eyes and get them to see the truth or the value in what you're doing, and get them as an advocate?
So, those initial conversations with almost always who's going to end up be the single point of contact for a project, are really meant to understand, again, like how open are they going to be for change and things like that. I will almost always ask directly, especially if they're sort of hedging around some of the answers that they give. I will say some version of, who at your company is the one who's going to come along and tank this project? Who's going to do the swoop and poop? Who's going to just pull the rug out from under us at the most inopportune moment? Almost always there's a name that comes to mind immediately, and then it's, let's go talk to that person. And a lot of times, if it's multiple people, what I'll try and do is just have one-on-one conversations with these people and get them to tell me their story and their perspective. It's usually it goes okay. sometimes one call it was, "Hi, my name's Matthew and immediately, look, I know what you're trying to do here and you are not taking this away from me." And I'm like, okay. And in my mind, I'm like, this is what we're doing right now. I am letting him complain for the next 20 minutes and yell at me. And I'll be like, great. Thank you for that. Because I don't care. I mean, I'm still getting paid to have this conversation. I mean, I do care, but like, I'm not taking it personally. And that's the thing. It's just almost always, it's just letting them express some pent up frustration they have with something that's going on in their organization. And almost always they talk themselves out of being a blocker. And it's the ones where they're truly intransigent and they just won't, for whatever reason, they won't go along with anything.
Does that stick for the duration of the engagement? When they talk themselves out of being a blocker, do they realize that they kind of
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, for me, I've found that it sticks, because my approach to running these projects is I bring all the stakeholders along with me the whole way. So nobody likes the big reveal, except for the people who are doing the big reveal, and I don't like the big reveal. So like that one project where I got yelled at for 20 minutes. When we got to the end of it and we were doing the readout, there were 0 questions. Well, I think there was 1 question. Because of the 25 people on the call, 24 of them had helped with the research along the way in some fashion. They had stayed informed, and we kind of didn't have to do the readout, but it was the right thing to do. And nobody was surprised. And that's the big thing. Like, I've had another project where we did the readout and nobody was surprised except for the one person who'd been on extended holiday while we were doing the project. And the readout was their first day back.
Yep.
And we were outlining all these organizational issues that were getting in the way of delivery, because that was part of the remit of the project. And he got really offended because a lot of it was his fault. But we were told, like, we got to do the research. We can't wait for him to get back. And that was like, got super awkward really quick.
It's amazing. Like, the flip side of that, though, like, you think about everybody else in the room, and because they were involved, they saw the importance of what it was. So they were bought in, and so I think that's a powerful thing too, just having those stakeholders feel like they're heard because they're part of the process. Doesn't matter how much other voice of the user you get in there to dilute one stakeholder's pet project. If they feel heard, they can be bought in. I think that's a really, really cool story.
Yeah. And I'd much rather spend a little bit more time up front getting that alignment than I would jumping into the research. Especially if I sense that there's going to be an issue, or if I'm told so-and-so is going to be an issue. It just makes my job easier, and it makes the research more impactful. So
it is amazing how often you get told, like, this person.
Yeah. Everybody knows who the asshole is in the room. So it's like, all right, well, how are we going to mitigate their impact on this effort? And that's where we spend, the first week and a half of conversations. We don't go talk to customers right away. We have to go talk to Gary. Not a real Gary. Just
right,
Gary.
Right.
Gary's kind of my go-to.
It was definitely
right
Gary.
now. Yeah. It was definitely Gary.
All the characters and names in this podcast are made up. And
Right. Yeah.
Or
Even
fictional.
ours.
Okay, I have a quick question because, we work with a lot of mission-driven organizations. And so that's fairly large nonprofits, research aquariums, laboratories, research institutions, higher ed, things like that, who all have so many stakeholders that all get a very diplomatic voice. And one particular project comes to mind, and we're working on a second build for them right now. But on the first build, we had this interesting kickoff where we had all these voices in the room of who thought everything was going to be very important. This was a homepage exercise, and we sort of did a card sorting thing where we took every department head that was in the meeting with us, and we made them work with somebody who was diametrically opposed to them and draw us what they thought a homepage should look like. And almost across the board, they came up with like a split pane panel layout where their thing was on one side and the other person's thing was on the other side, and everything was relegated to modules below. I should note that first, as a group exercise, we kind of made a list of the things that all had to be included, like in a totality, right? And this was exercise just to show them that everybody thinks their own thing is the most important, but we're aligning behind the vision of the organization. And so we had to defer. And exactly where we got to in the first hour and a half of this 8-hour planned workshop was that no one in this meeting was aligned behind the vision of the organization. And I'm just curious, like, we had a really tough time because these 3 different areas of the organization were actually equally as important to their bottom line revenue. It's a nonprofit, but the executive director wanted them to move in this direction and attract more of this particular audience. And so that's who we were there to accommodate for the most part. How do you, what should we have done in that situation? Should we have like stopped the workshop? Should we have, because at this point too, I should note, and I think this is important, that the users, in this case, the visitors or constituents of the organization, were not the most important audience because they were actually trying to change who their focus was on. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what you should have done. What I would have done, and what I have, I mean, it's only happened twice where it's gotten that chaotic, I'll say.
Yeah.
Is shut it down.
Yeah.
It's really like that is the flag to stop, and then go have conversations with the people who are the ones who have the biggest voice in the room.
Yep.
And omit everybody else's voice for the moment, and then bring them back together again. And it's honestly, it's stuff like that has really put me off of group activities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'd almost rather have 12, not almost, I would rather have 12 individual conversations that then I bring together for everybody rather than one conversation with 12 people trying to get something
that's
done.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's actually faster.
I believe that, but they all felt really invested once we finally came to sort of the conclusion, and the executive director stood up and said, well, here's the direction we want to go. And we were like, these are all just representative ideas. None of them are what's going to be the final product, et cetera, et cetera. And we moved on to a bunch of other things, but, boards are tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's like, that's the thing too, is like when you get into these situations, you have to always have a backup plan. Like, when this goes off the rails, I mean, if it goes off the rails, what are we going to do? What can we focus on? And I don't know what that would be for that case, but if you got something out of it, great. But I do think, like, what I think has to be on the table is just shutting it down and going back to a smaller group, and having that be okay.
Starting that way in the first place. I like that idea.
Starting that way in the first place, but sometimes you can't. So
there's different exercises that are super effective with groups to get feedback, but like keeping in mind that the people you're asking to tell you what they want are not designers. So they're not going to come up with something good most of the time. Their ideas are good. Their feedback is good. You compile that together and synthesize it down into learnings. That's good. But, not designers.
Yeah. And I think, this is going to open up a can of worms potentially, but I'm definitely on that side of everyone's a designer. If design is defined as I've made choices for a thing to be a certain way. And so I think, like, I'm not going to rely on the solution that someone who isn't a trained designer is going to come up with, But I also know that great ideas come from everywhere.
Absolutely.
And if that's the way that they can express themselves, and again, going back to like human nature, people express themselves typically by way of solution. Like, let them go, let them draw the future that they think they need, and then say, all right, now walk me through your thought process of how you got there. And that's when you start digging into the, what's the requirement behind this, what's the goal behind this, and you start, reverse engineering requirements basically.
All of that. But that's where the expertise and, wisdom from having done it for so long comes in, because you're that interpretation of all this raw information and turning it into what the solution could be.
Yeah. And I think that's my role, and that's why I'm brought in, is to be that sort of arbiter of the chaos that is, a group of people trying to go toward find a shared vision in the first place, and then go toward where that vision needs to take them. So.
And sometimes it's something that can only be done by a third party, right? We can't, humans cannot use that level of candor and judgment free and, without being somehow biased or expected as biased anyways, or assumed as biased. So.
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of things you can do as that sort of neutral external perspective to give. The big thing, and this is what it took me a little while to learn, is people really need implicit and explicit permission to fuck up in front of other people. And there's lots of times where I will make mistakes on purpose. And like if we're doing some sticky note, design thinking exercise, I'll put in, I almost said typos, even though I'm writing it, but I'll misspell things. I'll put something in the wrong place, and I'll just grab it off the wall, crinkle it, and throw it over my shoulder and be like, oh, and it's basically just, that's the implicit way of expressing like what we're doing here isn't precious. And we just need to put all these ideas through fire and see what comes out the other side.
I love that.
I like that too.
I'll even sometimes, don't tell anybody this, but I'll even sometimes put purposeful typos in reports and presentations so that people who are attending can feel like they can help influence things by pointing out the typo. And I'll be like, oh, thanks for that. You helped.
Are you just saying that to prime your clients to think that that was intentional? Is that what's happening right now?
What? No, of course not.
But it kind of covers both bases, though. I mean,
exactly,
let's be honest,
right?
Yeah.
Now everyone's going to wonder. So, yep, it's awesome.
Mm-hmm. I mean, sometimes they really are typos, but whatever.
So I get frustrated with typos, but I recognize also that it's just part of what we do, and it's, to me, it's, we're producing so many words on such a constant basis that, like, I'd rather we can communicate effectively than care about whether we forgot a second L in, parallel or something like that.
Oh, I knew you were going to say parallel when you said second L.
Did you?
I'm like that too. I'm like, wait, is it where the two L's go? Yeah, okay.
There's two L's in here somewhere.
Yeah, where's that red line?
And technically there's three L's, so yeah.
I know
it's,
it. All right, we have two last questions for you, Matt, so we can this, I think, was a great question John asked, which is, what can business leaders be doing now to help them create better client experience across the board?
Well, I mean, the easy answer to that question is go out and listen to your customers. It's really hard to, it's actually really easy to do. You just go and talk to them and listen to what they have to say in as unbiased a way as possible.
What?
To then make business decisions based off of that is definitely the hard part. You've got to figure out who you're talking to, what their motivations, barriers, constraints, and needs are. How do you collect that information? How do you then make decisions based off of that? How do you track that stuff? Like, a fair bit of that is what, is now called research ops, that you have essentially a CRM for your customers for the feedback you're getting off of what their reactions are to your product or service. So you can track that stuff over time. It definitely takes some fair bit of setup to start with, but after that it just tends to run and you can just go out and talk to people. But I think that's the big thing, is like making sure you're talking to the right people, and then making sure you're asking questions in as little leading them as possible. So if you're like, hey, if we made an app that made your life better, would that make your life better? Oh, check. Let's do that. As opposed to, tell me what your morning routine is like. Because in the back of your mind, you may be making some app or service that helps people start their day off right. But it isn't, hey, look at my app. It's, tell me about your lived experience. I want to know, because you're the expert on your life and I'm the newbie. Even if this is like the 170th person you've talked to about this, like each time you're there to learn. You're there to listen.
What is it
That's
you
probably
said?
not a complete answer, but
More listening, less. You had a great catchphrase you gave me.
did I?
Uh-huh.
Now
I've lost
I don't
it already.
remember what it was.
All right.
Did I write it down somewhere?
You did. I have it written down, but if I
no.
open it, it'll crash everything because it's an app that I can't run alongside
I'm
streaming.
sure it was very adroit.
It was. You said, here's the catchphrase.
Here's the catchphrrease. Oh,
The catchphrase earlier was,
sorry.
What
the fuck is going on?
Yeah, what's going on?
Yeah.
Which is good too.
I think there's a lot of wisdom to the quick to listen, slow to speak thing. Especially as a researcher, and there's always a chance to ask what else, like you said, Matthew.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something like I see all researchers have their own style. We all do essentially the same work, but we all have our own style. And I've noticed that when I've partnered with other people, when there's silence, there's this tendency to want to say something. And like, I will not say anything. I have this thing where I count to 10 and then I wait and I see, are they still not saying anything? That's fine. I mean, if they're looking at me expectantly, then that's one thing. But if they look like they're thinking, I'll count to 5, and then I'll say, "What are you thinking?" Just to prompt because sometimes they get lost in their thoughts and they need that prompt to come back. But like, I will not say anything at all. And I've been in projects with other researchers where it's like 1 count, 2 count, 3 count. So what do you think?
Then do it.
No, just there to listen. They're the expert. You're the beginner. Let them guide you. If it's going on for a couple minutes, then let's reel it in, buddy. But it's
Well, I appreciate that because that is not who I am at all. So I'm probably not the best person to go out and talk to our clients. I just want to finish their thoughts for them because I kind of know where they're going, and now I'm sick of hearing it. I don't want to hear the rest of it. So it's a terrible quality. But
yeah, and that's actually a really good point. And I want to say this is like, sometimes someone will contact me and say, "Hey, we want to go talk to 20 people," and I'll be like, "No, you don't. You want to talk to like 3, 4. Let's start with 3, because we'll start hearing the same answer to these questions, and like, we don't need to go talk to 20 people." Sometimes we do, but because we'll hear the same thing. We'll know what the end of their sentence is because we've heard it already.
Yep.
And it's like, let's commit to these short rounds of research and build our confidence and build our clarity to the point where we don't need to talk to people ever again. Wait, no, that's not right.
So even 3 people is better than 0 people, and sometimes it's even better than 20 people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I always go with 3 because it's like, if the first 2 say differing things and the third one's the tiebreaker,
you find the commonality. That seems
doesn't
easy.
always work out that way, but
yeah,
seems
like an easy.
It is
ask.
easy.
And how often should I ask 3 people? Every quarter? Every 6 months?
Yep.
All of the above. Perfect.
I mean, it's continuously, right?
I like it.
So
Yep.
it's just continuous improvement approach to this, where you're always talking to people about something. So,
all right, you've inspired me to actually go out and do that with my clients.
or listen.
Yeah.
Listen. Yeah.
As a service-based organization, and especially in my role, I don't have direct communication with clients once they get through the sales process a lot of times. And so it's only when we're maybe moving the account from one point of contact to another point of contact, and I'll get involved to make sure they understand how the transition is going to work and things like that. But it's incredible how much feedback I get in those very short calls, and I really do appreciate it. So you've inspired me to make that a bigger part of what I do on a day-to-day. So, all right, last question, which is, will you share some of the leadership principles that guide you and that you live by every day?
That I live by every day?
Well, that you try to, or that
well, I don't know about that. Well, I think you won't be surprised to hear that one of them is listening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will say that sometimes I probably listen a bit too much, but I've never found that it hurts me to spend a little bit more time listening and waiting before I act on something. So listening for sure, being as kind as possible, because with the exception of 3 people that come to mind.
What are the names?
Yeah, Gary, and Gary. With the exception of 3 people that come to mind, that I think every person who I've ever run into who's been kind of a blocker to getting things done is a blocker because there's something going on in their life that they're struggling with. And if I don't take that into consideration and make space for them to express that, or to have the opportunity to set it aside for at least a bit, then I'm not doing my job right. So being kind with people, understanding that, the moment I meet them, there's been a story going on that I have no insight into. And I need to take that into account when they are saying no to something. So being kind. And lastly, that literally nothing is about me. I am here to help. And my job title does not matter. I am a helper. And I am wake up every day and my goal is to help somebody. So that's it.
Well, if that doesn't make people want to work with you, I don't know what does. Such a nice thing to say. Where can people find you if they want to find you? Where can we point people to?
My company website is StudioVO.co. And I am really not on the socials at all anymore.
You mean
LinkedIn,
you're on X
obviously.
though, right? Obviously, you're still all over it.
Fuck that guy. Okay? He gets nothing out of me.
He's clearly talked to a lot of his users and has really taken their feedback seriously.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't really do the socials much anymore. So,
all right. So StudioVO.com. And what are your .co?
Yeah,
we're a CO too. It's hard. It's a hard life to live. Yep.
It's hard. Yeah.
And what if there was a ideal project? What would that look like? Ideal project or client? Who do you want to fall into your lap?
My favorite projects are the ones where it is like that, people have meetings to go find out about that. It's we're really curious about this space, and we don't think that the result or outcome of this project needs to be something that's actionable right away. We just want to explore. We want to see if we know our customers well enough. We want to see if we're looking for opportunities to grow or to change or whatever it is. The projects where it's like, hey, could you see if this app works? Those are fine, and those are helpful to do for people. But the most fun are the ones with a lot of ambiguity.
Cool. Well, Well, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us and spending the afternoon with us.
Sure.
I hope
It's
you
been a pleasure.
hope you get some cool weather soon. Hope we all do.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, yes. Please.
Turn your
All
fan
right.
back on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Goodbye, y'all.
Bye.